Hi everyone, welcome to Bonnie Carol Lee Makes Cards. I am excited to be participating in one of over 100 designers in Simon Says Stamps United We Craft blog party. I have used a number of Simon Says Stamps products in this card, which will be highlighted in the video. To begin this card, I'm creating a background using Canson watercolor paper. I will be working with Ranger Inks Distress Stains, Frayed Burlap, Milled Lavender, and Victorian Velvet. The stains have a dauber end, which makes them very easy and fast to apply. After wetting the paper, I run the dauber horizontally across the paper. When I'm finished applying the inks, I take a wet paintbrush and just soften the edges between the stripes. Next, I work on the daisy bouquet. The image is stamped with Versamark ink. I apply a white embossing powder by Wow and heat set it. The flower image is painted with two of the distress stains that were used in the background, Frayed Burlap and Victorian Velvet. This image is quite fine and detailed. The white embossing powder on the white watercolor paper did make it a little bit challenging to see. I found it easiest to hold the paper as I painted so that I could tip it slightly and catch the light. In this way, I could see the shine of the embossed lines and figure out where all those tiny petals were. The flower petals were painted using Victorian Velvet using a watercolor brush. I began by applying one layer of stain. I wanted to have a good visual of how the flowers overlapped one another before I started working on shadows. I then went back and painted additional stain at the base of each petal and along the edges where petals overlapped one another. I used frayed burlap to paint the flower centers and the stems. After the short drying time, I fussy cut the image. I tried to cut along the embossed lines as best I could. I actually know several people who really find fussy cutting a relaxing thing to do. I am not one of those people. But what I do have is lots of perseverance. To add some additional detail to the background, I will be using Simon Says Stamps Quilted Hearts background. When working with larger stamps, particularly rubber stamps, I like to just stick it to my media mat. It is a one-shot deal, so I am very careful applying pressure to ensure that I get a good image impression. The image is coated with white embossing powder and heat set. A small panel was prepared for my sentiment using Distress Stains, Victorian Velvet, and Frayed Burlap. The sentiment Celebrating You was stamped with Versamark ink and heat set using white embossing powder. I'm one of those people that struggles getting sentiments straight. When it's appropriate, I reach for a set of dies by Simon Says Stamp called Sentiment Labels. For me, this is a staple in my craft room. I die cut the background using a scalloped edge frame from Simon Says Stamp Frames. After I've trimmed the sentiment strip, I'm ready to start assembling my card. The central panel is mounted on sheet foam and trimmed. This panel is centered on my A2 sized card base and adhered. I then attach the thin scalloped frame around it. When I attach the flowers, I avoid putting glue at the tips of the flower petals so that I can lift those up, providing a bit of dimension. After attaching the sentiment with glue, I changed my mind and ended up mounting it on foam squares. I decided to make an envelope for this card using Simon Says Stamps New Die A2 V-flap envelope. I die cut the main body of the envelope and two flaps. I embossed some simple decoration using a grouping of daisies from Daisy Bouquet and the address lines. Next, I assembled the envelope. I used my bone folder to make crisp folds on the two side flaps. I then folded the bottom flap so I would have a guide when I attached the side pieces. I decided to assemble the envelope using score tape rather than glue. Score tape is very strong and I wouldn't have to worry about the glue seeping out. After lining up the side flaps carefully, I attached them to the envelope. Next, I applied the score tape to the lower portion of the side flaps. I closed up the lower flap and created the pocket of the envelope. To finish up, the flowers were painted with Distress Stain Victorian Velvet. I also placed score tape along the top flap so that when I was ready to use the envelope, it would be good to go. I have used other envelope makers and this is by far the easiest one. That completes this card and envelope set using all products from Simon Says Stamp, but featuring one of my favorite stamp sets, Daisy Bouquet. This post is part of Simon Says Stamp's United We Craft Party. With over 100 designers participating, there is lots of inspiration for you to see. Please visit simonsaystampblog.com.